What's up, everybody? I hope you're doing well. I remember the early days of being a therapist, gearing up to see clients and just feeling so anxious, like really anxious, like a borderline I'm gonna have a panic attack anxious. And having experienced severe panic disorder back in high school and overcoming it, I knew all the right tools to cope with the anxiety. I took deep breaths, I engaged in activities that helped me relax, I didn't avoid the thing that made me anxious. And don't get me wrong, those coping skills are well and good. I still use them all the time as needed. But at the time, I framed it as like, this is all happening because of my history with panic disorder. And now that I've been a therapist for a minute, when I look back on that early career anxiety, I see it more as a normal part of learning a new skill. Dare I say, a healthy part of practicing becoming a therapist. And given that, I think I could have interacted with the anxiety a bit differently to help it stay contained and take up the appropriate amount of space in my body, rather than sometimes threatening to take over and overwhelm my system. So just in case I'm not the only one who's felt this way early in our career, or let's be honest, at any point in our career, I thought I'd share some of those tools here in case they might be helpful to you. Also, in a second, for those of you who are watching along, you're going to notice a sudden outfit quick change. That's because I filmed this video earlier this week and then lost the footage where I introduced the video for some reason. So I'm re-recording the intro right now, but in just a second, you're gonna see me swap outfits. I know it is Halloween right now when I'm re-recording this intro, but I'm not in the practice of putting jump scares in my episodes, so I thought I'd give you a little heads up. So here's the first tip and the primary point that I want to emphasize today. When the anxiety shows up leading up to a session or at the beginning of a workday, or maybe you're starting a new internship, whatever situation it might show up in, rather than simply noting the anxiety and then using the tools you have to try to engage your parasympathetic nervous system to calm down, I invite you to first ask what your narrative is around the anxiety. Let me explain, and in order to do so, here's that outfit change I told you about. I think both as a society and as a profession, we've become so prone to wanting to reduce or eliminate anxiety whenever it shows up that we often forget that anxiety is a very appropriate response in certain situations. So then what can happen is we can find ourselves in whatever kind of career situation we might be in, the anxiety pops up and we see it like a fire that we need to put out. Like, let's extinguish that anxiety. The fact that it's present is already an issue. It shouldn't even be here. Let's get rid of the anxiety. And I think we can forget a lot of times that our bodies have anxiety as a built-in response in order to help us in the right situations. I remember for me, in those early days especially, I would see that anxiety pop up before a session or something like that, and the narrative would sound something like this. Darn anxiety, it's back again. I thought I overcame this in high school. What am I gonna do if I get anxious in session? What if my clients can see that I'm anxious? They're gonna think I'm not competent as a therapist. I have to get rid of this anxiety at all costs so it doesn't cause problems for me. So for me, at least, the anxiety would pop up and like all my alarm bells would go off, like, need to get rid of this anxiety ASAP. This is only going to cause chaos and destruction, so we must eliminate it. But now that I have a good chunk of years under my belt as a therapist, I can look back at how that anxiety showed up in those early days and replace it with a narrative that sounds a little bit more like this. Woo, there's that anxiety. Hello. Wow, that sure feels uncomfortable. What brings you here today, anxiety? Are you trying to tell me something? Which part of me is feeling nervous? Let me think this through. Okay, I see I'm implementing a new therapeutic approach with my client today, and the perfectionist in me is afraid I'll mess up. That makes sense. When I make this kind of shift in my narrative around anxiety, then rather than trying to get rid of the anxiety, I'm consulting with it. I'm saying, oh, hello, anxiety. You've shown up here for some reason. I'd really like to get to know what that is. Ironically, whenever I acknowledge that the anxiety might be there for a good reason, that it's valid, that it makes sense that it's present, it immediately lifts the intensity of the anxiety to a manageable level. So my primary tip for you in this episode for when that anxiety shows up, whether you're early in your career or somewhere later in your career, is to gently ask yourself what your narrative is around that anxiety. And definitely check in with yourself to see if there's anything about your narrative around the anxiety that's invalidating the anxiety, because Funny enough, when we invalidate the anxiety, we say it shouldn't be here, it makes the anxiety get worse. That's truly the takeaway for this episode. Like, if you want to log off now, great, I support you, but I'm going to offer some practical tips for how you can implement this in more specific situations. One item that comes up for a lot of us, myself included, is that because we assume that we're not supposed to feel anxious, then when the anxiety pops up, we can interpret it as a sign that we're not prepared. Like, if I'm getting ready for my first session with a new client at a new internship or something like that, and the anxiety pops up and I go, oh, I'm not supposed to be feeling anxious right now, then my brain needs to find a new way to see what's going on. Why am I feeling anxious if I'm not supposed to be? And we might interpret it as like, oh no, that's a sign that I'm not ready to see this client, or I'm not ready to be a therapist or to see clients in general. And then, of course, that narrative is only going to fuel even more anxiety, but it may not be accurate at all. Something I wish we talked more about as a culture, as a society, is how anxiety is a very normal response to doing new things. It is so normal. We should expect to feel anxious when we try something new. So if you're noticing that you're interpreting the anxiety as a sign that maybe you're not competent, pause, ask yourself, hold on a second. Am I maybe just feeling anxious because this is so new and I'm also having to perform while I'm learning how to be a therapist? In other words, can you reframe it to be a more accurate reflection of reality? The next tip, if you're feeling anxious when it comes to anything career related, I think it comes as no surprise, but if you can, definitely discuss it with trusted peers, supervisors, superiors, colleagues, whomever you trust around you, to basically kind of have that moment of like, I'm feeling nervous, I'm feeling anxious, and to just have someone outside of yourself normalize it for you and say, hey, it's okay. I feel anxious today. And of course, you can also hopefully support each other. Like, if somebody's nervous about something specific, well, then you can get some feedback or support each other in getting whatever tools you need in order to be prepared. Now, so far I've been talking primarily about anxiety like around our career, like leading up to the session or going into a work day or starting a new internship or starting your first job after you're licensed. But what about if you get hit with anxiety during session? Like, you're in session with your client and the wave comes. I've definitely been there many times. For me, at least, there were two primary categories of anxiety that would happen in session. One is the kind that we've been talking about so far, where I would be concerned that I wouldn't know how to approach a situation, that I wouldn't have the right tools to help my client. Maybe, they're bringing up a new topic and I haven't brushed up on that topic lately. And what if I do the wrong thing? So there's that category of anxiety in session. The other category of anxiety that I've personally experienced is when a client is bringing up something that brushes against my own experiences. For me, there's certain types of trauma that I've experienced in my history that if a client starts to bring that up in their story, my body reacts with a very anxious reaction. My sympathetic nervous system is like, get out of this situation now. So I'm going to address each of these a little bit separately. If it's the first scenario where you're afraid that you're not going to be knowledgeable enough, equipped, competent enough for whatever maybe new thing your client is bringing up, then just remind yourself that you don't have to know in this moment how to navigate that. If we tell ourselves that we have to be competent at everything all the time, then we're much more prone to make more serious mistakes. If we feel that we are supposed to know or look like we know everything, then we might make a decision in the moment that may not actually be what our client needs. No matter how far into your career you are, we're all still learning. None of us are experts in every single thing. There's just no way. There's so many ways that you can just acknowledge with your client out loud, hey, I'm gonna have to check on that and I'm gonna get back to you. And I think it's a lot easier to access that way of responding if we've embraced that we can't know everything and that it's in our client's best interest to always acknowledge when we don't know something. I think it is really important to understand and embrace that while we're learning, we will make mistakes. Like, maybe I realized that therapeutic technique that I applied that day really didn't quite make sense given whatever was coming up for my client. What's more important is to embrace a learner's mindset, be open to shifting, open to feedback, open to learning something new rather than saying like, I have to get it right. I can't make mistakes. It's always okay to come back to our client the next session and say, you know what, last time I tried this thing with you and I thought about it a little bit after, and I'm realizing that maybe something else might be a little more helpful. Can we talk about that? Are you willing to make a change? Get feedback from your client as well. But if we feel like we can never make mistakes ever, then we're just going to be an anxious ball in all of our sessions, and our clients can feel that too. Now, if it's the latter scenario I described where you're having more of like a trauma response that looks like anxiety, then of course, utilize the coping tools that I mentioned at the beginning. If you can practice some deep breathing or, do what you need to kind of compartmentalize and take care of yourself in the moment. And I would strongly urge you after that session to make sure you consult with some trusted colleagues. Pretty much any time you have a trauma response, I think that that's a good idea, whether it's trusted colleagues, supervisors, peers, even your own personal therapy, wherever you have access to folks who can support you in better understanding what happened there and what to do now going forward. But even with all that said, it is still totally normal to have a trauma reaction in session, especially if you have your own history of trauma. That's how our bodies work. Obviously, that's a topic that could be its own episode, and I'm not going to delve deeper into it for now, but I just wanted to validate that as one of the potential ways that anxiety can show up. Well, hopefully this episode is helpful to you to just reframe the anxiety as normal, expected, healthy even. Can we talk about anxiety as a healthy part of our lives? I would love that. Let's just insert that into our conversations in general. And I hope that this helps you feel a little bit more okay wherever you are in your career, and especially in the early career days, because that's when I felt the most anxious. And before we close, I'd like to thank TherapyNotes.com for sponsoring today's video. TherapyNotes helps with all of your practice management needs, scheduling, notes, billing. They have a HIPAA-secure telehealth platform included for free for all users, and so much more. If you'd like to check out TherapyNotes, you can get 2 months to try it for free with no commitment just by clicking the link in the description of this video. Well, my friends, thank you for joining me in this episode. And I know I kind of framed this as directed towards early career therapists because that's at least when I felt the most anxious in my career. I'm noticing I just kind of have a draw towards speaking towards the early career experience, grad school, etc. But I know anxiety can show up in any context. So wherever you're at, I hope that you found this supportive. I'm wishing you well. And until next time, from one therapist to another, I wish you well.